Hello and welcome to Mytech U November edition. Today we're going to talk about a guide to infrastructure stability and supportability. This is something that Mytech has spent a lot of time on, and especially when our customers ask us, well, how do we know we're making the right technology investments, and why should we invest in certain technologies that might sometimes cost a little bit more, but what are the real reasons and benefits for it? So today we're going to go over some, not every last detail, but we're definitely going to cover some of the high-level components that we've learned have contributed to infrastructure stability and the ability for organizations like Mytech or IT support, whether you have multiple locations that's internal, or if you're dealing with an outside firm like Mytech, that enable us to do a better job of supporting the environment. So we're going to go through that today. We're very fortunate to have James Moats with us. He's our NOC team manager, and he'll be helping me go through and make sure that I keep myself safe from a technical perspective. So thanks for joining us, James. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I stepped into the NOC manager role in June. I've been working on this team for a while. Great team. A lot of people are really dedicated to basically delivering on what we're talking about here, how to keep networks up and stable. So hopefully Nate and I can together provide a little bit of helpful guidance going forward on some general best practices and how to make my job easier in the future, which is really encouraging to me.
Great. So thanks, James. Moving on. So why is this important? You know, I just thought I'd put a picture up that helps visualize the importance of having, I think we could all hopefully agree that this type of environment is not what we're looking for. And so, and the reason why this is important is not because, you know, it does make our jobs easier, as James was mentioning, but it's not about just making our jobs easier. The important part is the impact to you and your organization and your network. You know, typically when we work with the leaders of an organization or the IT managers of an organization, their customers and our customers are basically your staff. And your staff want their technology to work. You want them to be able to use their technology effectively, and you want it to work all the time, as much as possible, if not all the time, and that it enables them to do their job, because their job is not to be technologists. So the importance of this is, and this is not a mystery. There's actually not a mystery here. There's some very clear variables, and there's guidelines that we can follow that actually doesn't 100% prevent against outages and failures, because we're dealing with hardware, and just like a car, even if you get a brand new car, something could fail, there could be a defective part. So it doesn't mean that nothing will ever cause an outage, but what are the things that we can do that can contribute to a successful, highly available running environment that also is able to be supported effectively in the event of when those outages or those problems occur. So, and that's the end goal, is to really keep your staff happy and productive so that they're using their technology and not complaining about it. So, moving along. So James, well, actually, so let me do a quick overview. So we're going to cover some 4 basic areas today that are contributing to stability and supportability. First, we're going to talk about some basic rules for hardware and lifecycle management. Secondly, we're going to talk about I like to reference the $250 card that most people don't know about, but actually makes a significant difference in the event of a power outage. So we'll touch base on that. We're also going to talk about some inexpensive ways that you can build some redundancy in your systems, as well as some of those that aren't necessarily inexpensive but might make sense depending on the size of your organization. So we'll go over that. And then finally, one of the main parts about, you know, you want to be able to protect against the occasional outage that does happen, and what, you know, it's not really about the backup, but it's about the recovery, and we're going to talk about some of those variables as well. So thank you again for joining us, and as we go through the presentation, by all means, please use the questions section of your control panel, and we will either answer those online and try and interject those questions into the conversation, or we will follow up with you afterwards if we're not able to answer your question during the presentation. As well as this is recorded and will be available for future if that's something you want to be able to reference it in the future or send it on to another colleague. With that said, James, I'll hand it over to you. Please take the next section.
So I wanted to start with this is actually something that falls through the cracks a lot. This is the physical aspect of all the fancy computers and networking gear and everything that kind of excites us technology nerds a little bit. there's some basic premises that we want to talk about is where does that go and what is it like in the room that those things live in. In that first picture that Nate showed, I mean, you saw cables running everywhere. You saw, in my opinion, kind of maybe an open door in the background there maybe. Sometimes, depending on the way that your building is, like you're kind of stuck with where your equipment goes, but you need to be thinking about not only the kind of more advanced technology components to this, but just as a matter of like making sure that the room that they're in is sufficient to keep the network up. And there's not a whole lot that you really have to be concerned with, although it can get more complicated as you get into bigger data centers. But two of the big things that often go overlooked are just having an environmentally controlled room and just making sure that room is secured, or if it's not in a room, that there's a way to lock down the space where this is in. This is important because in the case of the environmental controls, we're basically talking about heat. The enemy of all computers and computer processors is heat. And as your temperature rises, if it's in a hot room or even a closed-off box, or you're not getting airflow over the actual computing processor, you're going to really run into some problems very quickly. And even if it's just a little bit warm, that does impact how long that hardware is going to keep running. So the hotter it gets, the worse it gets. So you really want to make sure you're at least watching for when the servers are climbing in temperature. So those processors, if they start getting warm, you want to be able to know about it. And depending, too, if the room has got a pretty good air conditioning unit and you don't really have any major complaints, most places you can get by with that's good enough. Some places it's more important. The room has got problems, the air conditioner is getting older, or you just have zero tolerance for a heat problem. You might actually want to put in an external sensor that the only purpose of the device is to sit in the room and notify you when it's getting too hot. And we've had this in a couple of places where somebody had a server closet where the air conditioner failed on a weekend. And then these servers and equipment, they generate a lot of heat. And if there's not something there to cool that down or to vent that heat out, they will really start to suffer. And by Monday morning, you can be in a pretty critical situation. And these are things that often don't get thought about. Usually you're just trying to find some empty room closets to shove a server into when you first get started. But you do want to consider this over time. If you want a network that stays that you can do the best you can do to keep it up and supportable and sustainable and minimize your chances for downtime. You can't ever remove them, but you can minimize them. These are some things to think about. The other piece to this, and this is one that actually Mytech, the actual organization, got burned with. One of our locations had a problem with this, where you can have all your equipment properly cooled and contained and everything, but if the room is not secured or the rack that it's living in is not secured, somebody can just come and mess with it, to put kind of a blunt point on it. So what we had recently is we were in a building in one of our locations that had some construction going on, and what we suspect is one of the construction folks came in and basically touched something they shouldn't have touched, and suddenly the one office had no internet. And we eventually tracked it down, and because that room was not locked, somebody was able, who was not authorized or didn't know what they were doing, thought they maybe were doing something, but they basically pulled the wrong cable and caused a little outage for us until we could find that wire and plug it back in. So you really want to make sure that you keep these areas secure and you keep them controlled properly as far as air temperature goes. Just as a basic minimum, if you've got a closet, put a lock on the door. If you've got a server rack, put a cage around that rack with a lock on it, and make sure that only the people that know what they're doing have access to it. So these are just a couple of kind of the very basic starting points that, like I said, often get overlooked as we start talking about fancier solutions. So,
and thanks, James, for those examples. One of the things that I like to highlight is all of the examples that we're giving, that James gave and that we're going to give throughout the presentation, have actually occurred to either Mytech or to our customers. And these are things that can be prevented as long as we have the right conversations and we're proactive about putting the right pieces in place. So with that said, we'll move on to the next section relative to hardware lifecycle management. So one of the pieces that we also talk about, which is really basic, I won't spend a lot of time on this particular section, is really keeping your equipment less than 5 years old. Plan on budgeting to replacement your equipment inside of, either at or before the 5-year mark. Mytech has an internal guideline that we've established in the last couple of years where our goal is to replace production laptops in between 3 and 3.5 years of age, because after about 3 years they start, especially if they're very mobile, they do end up having problems after the 3-year mark. And then we replace desktops at around the 4 to 4.5 year mark. So that's kind of our benchmark as far as how we budget to replace equipment. And we replace our production server and equipment less than 5 years old, and we keep it under warranty. So the other thing about warranty, speaking of warranty, that on the server side, we do recommend that a 24/7 4-hour response, that's what the by 4 means, so 24/7 response, but a 4-hour response warranty for the full production life all the way through the 3 to 5 years, depending on the life that you keep the server around. Because in the event of some hardware failure, do you really want to wait till the next business day in order to replace your equipment? Because of the outage or the downtime that could have as an impact to your organization. So that's where we recommend, they are a little more expensive than the next business day warranties, but in the event of an outage, they are absolutely worth it. We have had a customer that had multiple failures happen, and the problem was, so they had a next business day warranty, and one piece failed, and so we initiated a warranty, and all of the diagnostics were pointing to this one piece of equipment. But once we got that one piece of equipment up and running, then the diagnostics showed that there was actually another failure. So guess what? We had already waited the next business day to get the one piece fixed, and now we had to go through the diagnostic process again and initiate another warranty request, which took it into the next business day. So we were 2 days to get hardware warranty fulfilled when we actually could have had it done inside of 8 hours or by the next morning from a production perspective. So having that 24/7/4 warranty is significant as far as it can impact your organization. And on desktops and laptops, we do recommend having a 3-year warranty on those, after which we don't really go through. I mean, if you really want to extend the warranty, we can, but we've worked with. It's really that the manufacturers make it difficult. Actually, and because they're so low value in an individual desktop or laptop, it's not the easiest process to go through, and so some of the value they get out of it versus what you might pay for it beyond the 3-year mark isn't really as critical, because at that point you probably want to potentially replace the device anyway. However, within the 3 years, we do recommend you getting an on-site warranty. There are some warranties out there that are depot warranties, and what that means is if something fails, you have to send your machine in to their depot to get it fixed, and they send it back, which could be a week or 2 weeks for you to get the device back. That's not exactly a good turnaround. And finally, with laptops, we do recommend getting accidental coverage. That means that if you drop it, spill it, it falls out of your bag. I've definitely had it where people, when they're just getting out of the car to go to the airport with their laptop, it falls out of the bag and lands on the street. I've had people accidentally spill coffee. All these things have happened, and those things are covered if you have an accidental warranty. So those are things to consider with laptop desktop warranties. Again, on-site, 3-year recommended, on-site warranty, and with laptops, add the accidental coverage. That's definitely worth it in the event of any type of failure. The other thing we'd like to mention with regard to hardware management and hardware lifecycle management is we prefer and we recommend a major manufacturer, because when you get to the we call it white boxes in the industry. So a white box is something where you might have gone down to the local computer store and you might want to put a whole bunch of pieces together. You bought a motherboard, you bought a processor, you bought a hard drive, all that kind of stuff. Putting that together, that's fine if you're a hobbyist and if you want to be responsible for maintaining that warranty. But in a business environment, there are companies that all they do is warranty support, and they will do it better than you, I promise you. And they'll do it better, which is one of the reasons why we don't take that on. We want to work with a major manufacturer that has a lot more money to be able to have warranty support and be able to provide equipment in the event of failure.
And to add to that, Nate, I was just going to point out that a lot of times when you're somebody or you or somebody else is putting all the individual pieces together, because of the complexity of the components, nobody is really going to be able to say that, yeah, this hard drive and this motherboard and this processor, this memory, they're all going to work together just as good as anything else. They might, they may, they probably will, but there's no promise. And at least with a major manufacturer, somebody is saying to you, look, we've done this, we've run them, put it through its paces, and this set of little components put together under our kind of control is going to work better longer than we know we're going to put our name on it, that we trust that it will. It's not a perfect process. There's still lemons in that industry as well, but in general, you can trust that it's more likely to all work together better than it would be from just somebody from eBay. Plus, you never know, and then as modern security kind of gets, more and more different threats, if you find a computer on eBay or from some guy down the street, you never really know what he's left behind on that to come back into your network later. So just as a general rule, buying big manufacturer does tend to protect you on a number of fronts.
Yeah, great point, James. And it just reminded me one other thing that I forgot to mention relative to on the server side in particular is we've actually run across instances where we did not have a server was still in production. The customer did not keep the server under warranty, and a part failed. Well, the replacement part was available. However, because Dell and Lenovo and the likes, they have to keep. When you have a warranty, they are obligated to fulfill and keep hardware in inventory to fulfill the replacement parts of that warranty. But if you don't have a warranty, they are not obligated to give you that part. So we've actually encountered where, because a warranty didn't exist, even though the part was available from the manufacturer, they wouldn't give it because they had to hold on it to fulfill their other warranty obligations. So we had to source it through some other place, which took a lot longer to actually get the part. So, or in some instances, you might not be able to get the part because of the age. So that's another thing that's just a key thing about keeping everything in warranty. And then the last part, the old equipment is more difficult to secure. This really applies to James and the NOC world. James, I'd rather have you elaborate on this point because I know this is a world you live in on a regular basis.
Well, I mean, nobody likes to have to take what seems to be a fully functional machine and be told they have to get rid of it because it's not being supported anymore. But just as we get more and more security threats coming from more and more places, what you really want to be looking for is you want an operating system or a firmware or a hardware interface that is under active support, just because as people, the bad guys of the world are continually poking at things, and if they find a way to get around some existing security, this kind of 5-year window we're talking about, you're much more likely to have the manufacturer or the operating system developer, whoever it is, to be able to come on and say, oh, wow, that's a problem. Here's a way to fix that, to patch that hole in the security so that nobody else can do this in the future. Once you start getting outside this window, even on things like switches or routers, hardware controllers, things like that, there's much less likely that a manufacturer is going to come up with the fix to stop that threat from happening. They're just going to say, yeah, we could give you a fix, but honestly, we'd rather you bought something new, so we're not going to fix it, or we'll get to it when we get to it, which is not an acceptable security posture. So just in general, you kind of, if you're staying close in on the age of release, you're much more likely to have the fixes be applied or available to apply just to stop any sort of threat that does appear. You start getting outside that window, if something comes up, you're kind of going to be on your own, and that can be, depending on your industry, that could be disastrous to you.
All right, James, so I'll go ahead and let you take on the next slide as well. So getting into some of the other, the more the management side of the hardware, less the hardware lifecycle component.
Right.
So do you want to touch on that?
Sure. Just because that one of the ways that you gain efficiencies in IT, that's not even just in the way that Mytech does it, but just if you have your own internal team, is if you can, the more you can do without standing in front of the equipment or without having to be there visually looking at it or handling it, the faster you can get through things and check on things and make sure things are working right. So a lot of what we're talking about here is having the kind of equipment, which is generally a business or enterprise class equipment, that allows you to manage it remotely, which allows you to be in one location, or even from your house. If you're got it set up right, you could say, oh man, there's a problem at the office and it's Saturday morning and I really don't want to drive into work to do something. If you configure things properly, and I always bang the security drum, and securely, because you don't want to let the bad guys use these tools, you can lock these things down to be able to say, I'm going to just connect up here, I can do a couple of things, I put everything back online, and we're ready to go again. And the downtime is minimal. You don't have to spend any what we call windshield time, where somebody's in the car trying to drive to a location. Even in a single building, having the ability to have one person just be at their desk instead of walking into the locked closet, where there's always the chance of bumping a switch or unplugging the wrong thing or anything like that. It builds efficiencies faster and faster. So what we're talking about specifically on a server, hardware, we're saying like the box that you put into a rack or that you put on the shelf, is a bare metal. It's a management controller. These have a number of names depending on the manufacturer. I think Dell has called them iDRAC, HP ILO, IBM IMM. They're basically a special little mini computer that has a network cable that sits inside the server, and regardless of the state of the server that you're using for file or email or whatever it is that server is doing, that little computer can control all the hardware pieces and watch the hardware pieces independently of the primary one. It has its own power source, it has its own controls, so that you could say, go in there and the server's stuck on a reboot, you can go into this controller and boot it back up. Or you can see what's going wrong. If it's got one of those press any key to continues on startup, you can go press a key. They're very, very useful to people who've got to manage a number of machines all at the same time, and again, without having to stand in front of a physical machine. And it provides remote access and management. And it can even provide alerts to say, hey, I think that this disk might be failing soon. You might want to take a look at that. And that gets you in front of it before there's an actual problem. Similar with switches, when we say business class, again, for all the same reasons we've been talking about, we like modern business class switches for the same reasons we like modern business class everything. Beyond that, just saying that they're managed to be able to access these switches, these are the things that all the cables plug into, and it doesn't seem like they do very much, but networks are becoming more and more complicated, where you actually are going to ask these switches to do a lot more, and you want to be able to make sure that they are doing that, or to tell you when they think they're having a problem. And so you need that management, again, that isn't by default an option on a lot of switches. And Nate also mentioned gigabit speed. For the non-technical among us, you just want it, basically, there's a minimum standard, which is a gigabit switch for how fast it can move data around your network. And there's really no reason at this point not to be on gigabit with the size of most of our customers and most of what we're seeing. Data is not shrinking the amount you need to move, so you want to be able to move it as fast as possible. There's some other pieces that we want to talk about too. If you can get power over Ethernet, that's often helpful for sparing some plugs on your UPS or anything else. You want to be able to troubleshoot it remotely and access it remotely. And again, as they become more complicated, they aren't anymore. You want to be able to have the ability to deal with it and get some status of it and kind of check on how it's doing when you need to, and be able to have it alert you if necessary when it's having a problem. Similar for wireless, a lot of the same rules apply. You want to be able to have one that you can trust, and you want to have it that can handle the current security standards, which are ever changing. So again, as you start getting older, they will be less likely to support what is accepted as a current security practice, and that's important because, as I said, the bad guys keep poking, and especially with something like wireless, where they can just hammer on it all day long and you might not even know. You want to make sure that you're up to speed on what it should be. And again, allow remote management so that when it does have a problem or you need to do something with it, you don't have to go find the actual device. Especially in some of our customers, they have their wireless like 50 feet in the air in a warehouse or something like that. And going to find a ladder to go up there to hook a laptop up is not a very useful management practice. So I should also point out, as we talk about speeds, as new equipment can handle faster speeds, we just ran into a situation recently where we had a non-enterprise class switch on an environment, and we literally couldn't get things moved around fast enough to make their backup work, which we can talk about a little later. So it's important to stay current, stay in a modern supported business class device that allow you to deal with it when you need to without having to walk in front of it.
Thanks, James. And the only thing I would also like to say as far as why is all this stuff important, just reminding that it's not about that we're geeking out here and want you to have all these technical things that don't really have an impact to you. What we've learned over the years, and from when we first started Mytech 15 years ago, it was acceptable when a customer called us and asked us to fix a problem, it was acceptable to take 2 or 3 days or a week to get back to them, because the extent to which their business relied on the technology was such that it didn't really matter that much. Today, that is not the case. Our customers expect response time in minutes, and they want us to be able to do everything remotely, because that's going to be the quickest, most effective, cost-effective, and efficient way to handle these problems. And so in order to enable us, or your internal IT person, or a different support company that you work with, to be able to support you in the most expeditious and cost-effective way, these are some of the things that you can build into your environment that can ensure their success, to be able to have the effective access to be able to support you as quickly as possible. So thanks for that, James. So now we'll go to one of my favorite components that is very often overlooked, and again, this is me geeking out a little bit, is power. Backup, what people know as a UPS, or an uninterruptible power supply. So this is something that is often overlooked and not really understood as far as how important it is. But I promise you, if you have a UPS that has too many devices plugged into it, and all of a sudden your power goes down, and every single device that's plugged into that UPS goes offline, or in the event of a power outage, you're not able to sustain it through a power outage, and it causes corruption or problems in your infrastructure, spending a little extra time in this area of your business on this, and these devices aren't expensive, but spending a little extra time to make sure that you have the right UPS with the right configuration for the right amount of runtime will make a significant difference in the event of a power outage. Because if you don't do those things, you might as well just be buying a surge protector. Go down to Target and buy a $6 surge protector, and that's about what you're going to get if you don't go through these exercises. So spend a little extra time here, and here are the key variables. So first of all, one of the minimum variables and requirements that we recommend for our customers is that they have a UPS that if you put all the devices connected to that UPS that you want to be power protected, which is typically everything that's in the server closet. Sometimes your phone system might be on a separate UPS, but all of your technology that's in the server room or server closet or data closet, that in the event of a power outage, the battery life, based on the power draw of all the equipment on that UPS, the battery can sustain that equipment for up to 15 minutes. That is roughly our minimum requirement. The reason why is that allows us to have the ability to suffer through a short power outage that might only be a few minutes long, because sometimes power outages are just kind of a little bit of a brownout. So maybe just a little bit of a dip that'll keep you still up and running. You won't have to worry about it. Or if it does extend beyond 15 minutes, the UPS will have enough time to be able to effectively shut down your servers. And that was one of the key variables. We want to have it enough time to be able to shut down your servers. So for example, if it takes 5 minutes to shut down your servers, we're going to tell the UPS, keep a runtime of, say, 8 minutes, and then if the power doesn't come back on in 8 minutes, I want you to start initiating the shutdown of your servers so that they can be sure that they're shut down before the power actually drops off and the battery runs out. So that's one of the main variables, is just to really look at that, and just don't arbitrarily start plugging stuff in like a microwave, or I know that's kind of a silly example, but seriously, plugging equipment into your UPS can have an effect on all that production and equipment. So you can add batteries for runtime. I didn't mention generators in here, but it's more common where organizations will have generators. They might have a spare generator sitting in their closet. Mytech is actually, in our building in Minnesota, we are actually investing in a rooftop generator that is natural gas powered, that will be able to, pick up within seconds of a power outage. So, from our power requirements perspective, we just need the UPS to bridge the gap between the wall power going out and the generator picking up in the event of that happening. But that's something to consider as well for your own environment. Finally, so then getting to the UPS network card, why is this important? So in the world of virtualization, so in the last 7, 8, 10 years, as more small businesses use, there's no longer a one physical server to one server operating system ratio. There's usually multiple server operating systems to one physical server. The network card allows the UPS to actually talk to multiple servers. and you could have several different servers, and the network card can talk to all of them and be able to initiate the shutdown. So that's one of the ways in which they actually can speak to the current ways in which servers are deployed today, which is using virtualization. So that's very critical. The other thing that it can do, as James mentioned earlier, with regard to being able to connect, you're on a Saturday morning, something happens at the office, you don't want to drive in, or worse, maybe it's Saturday morning at 2 a.m. versus 10 a.m. and that you don't have to have us drive into the office. We can actually remotely connect to this card and either power cycle servers if we need to, and we can and actually understand and troubleshoot the situation. Finally, it can also help us get alerts when the UPS is having problems or if the battery is close to dying or when it dies. I'm sure that if all of us think back to where you might hear a random beeping sound sometime, well, that's your UPS usually telling you that the battery needs to be replaced. So this is one of the ways where we can be proactively alerting once that battery's running down. So those are some of the main ways that network card helps. And the other thing that I like to give an example, if you remember the days where you might be on the phone with tech support and they say, hey, go back to that room, the room with all the blinky lights, and push that one button that's a power button on the one thing that looks like it's not working. And instead of trying to walk you through that, this card also allows us to remote in and be able to do that power cycling, so we don't have to put that confusion and that burden upon you. So, James, anything else to add before we go to the next slide?
I also like the beeping is pretty much non-specific about what the problem is, only that there is one. It's sort of like the check engine light. That management card allows somebody to quickly tell you what it actually means instead of guessing. So that's also useful.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, James. All right, James, you want to take on some of the inexpensive redundancy options that we're talking about here?
Yeah, there's a couple of really easy and quick ones that are not very expensive, all things considered. And one of the big ones being multiple internet connections. Like I'd say almost all companies have one solid one that they're using to get data in and out, emails in and out, and all that. As Nate and I were talking about this, we started thinking about all the different things that our customers are now starting to use. They're starting to get beyond just email. A lot of applications are being hosted in the cloud. There's a lot of file transfer that's required. There's a lot of connections to other environments that you might need to make. And just think of what would happen if one of those connections went down, like all of those services stop. You might be able to be fully functional inside. It might not even have anything to do with your company or your building or even your city, but something back up the line somewhere can potentially break that connection and put you out of action for a long time. It's relatively inexpensive to just add a different connection from a different provider, where you have a cable company come in one, and then maybe one of the other like more traditional telcos come in on another one. There's two different networks, two different abilities to deliver the data to you, and much less likely to have one failure in that service take you out of action for a really long time. You're just removing what we call single point of failure from your ability to get those services. So, another similar event, if you have multiple connections, but they all go into one device before they come back into the rest of your network, which would be your firewall typically, then you again have another single point of failure. So an HA firewall, what we call high availability firewall, Nate can probably speak a little bit more to this, but basically what we're adding here is the ability to have one firewall crash and not be working and not have your business be really impacted at all. And this also allows us to do things like upgrade firmware or change some things around. It's a very efficient way to add some redundancy to your network, and again remove that single device having a problem and causing everything to go down and offline.
Yeah, James, I think that's this has become more and more critical as more and more of the services that we use to run our business are now outside of our local network, right? So that's where looking at some simple redundancy to mitigate against some known single points of failure, and it either is when you know that, for instance, if your main line of business application, like we have a lot of medical customers out in Denver in particular, and a lot of those medical line of business electronic health records or electronic medical records are hosted externally. So if that internet connection goes down or if that firewall fails, their entire business is down. So for just a little extra few dollars on top of what your firewall investment is, you can add on a high availability unit that ensures that you're going to have connectivity in the event of some sort of hardware failure or outage. The other thing that really usually speaks to IT people, because when I've worked with IT administrators in the past, they end up doing firewall maintenance or reboots, or they might be trying to troubleshoot something in the middle of the day, and they can't solve a problem because they can't reboot the firewall because it's going to take down the network and it'll stop the internet traffic that's happening. So one of the things that the HA of high availability does for you as well is the fact that the way it's designed, you can actually do that troubleshooting and do that maintenance and reboot the firewall in the middle of the day, and it actually won't take anybody down. So that's actually one of the nice things that when you think about an environment that really has to have its internet available, but yet problems do occur and maintenance does need to be done, where you can actually do that without causing a disruption to the organization. So, and if you're a multi-location organization, oftentimes the ways that we've seen this is maybe the branch offices or the remote offices don't need or isn't as critical that they have a high availability pair, but the main office, where there might be a bunch of connections coming back to the main office, that would be a good consideration, because now if that firewall fails, it's not just affecting that main office, it could be affecting all of your other remote locations too. So those are some considerations where we've seen our customers leverage high availability to mitigate against a single point of failure. So James, unless there's any final comments, I'll move on to this next slide.
No, this is some other things that we thought of. You can add a lot of redundancy for money, but then we also came up with a few other things that were not really that expensive in the grand scheme of IT budgets, but that can have a huge impact.
Right, and that's definitely that first slide as far as the pieces there. So, so we also wanted to lay in some additional redundancy considerations, which this first one isn't that expensive, and depending on the size of your organization, James gave the example when we were talking about this that, well, what if you're running payroll and the accounting person's PC dies or laptop dies? Having a spare available to quickly be able to recover while we figure out whatever happened to the machine to cause a failure, whether it was a physical or otherwise, that's something that's inexpensive and easy to be able to do and to have around. The other one that's also a pretty easy thing, and many people might have this already with their spam filter, but with different spam filters, there's options to have email continuity. So email is very, very critical to organizations today, more than it was definitely 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So a lot of times you might already have, or it's an easy add-on, or it's something you might already be paying for, is actually having some continuity. So even if you're using Office 365 and your email's hosted, or if you have an on-premise Exchange server, your spam filter can oftentimes be that continuity piece on your email, so that you can always make sure that your staff has access to email in the event of an outage. This next one could be expensive, relatively speaking, depending on the size of your organization. However, with virtualization, it used to be that for every server function, you needed to buy another physical server. So we'd have customers that would have, several different servers, even though they weren't highly utilized. Well, with virtualization now, we don't have to buy one physical server for every server function anymore. However, the negative of that is now it's taken a single point of failure with a server, and now you've put a lot of workload or multiple servers on a single point of failure. So one of the easy ways that, depending on the size of your organization, it makes sense from a budget perspective or a risk mitigation perspective, is to simply buy and have another physical server where either one of the servers or one of many servers, depending on the size of your organization, you might have 3 or 4 or more, but even if it's a small organization, having 2 physical servers where the workload can be spread across the 2, but in the event of a failure, the one of the server that still remains functional can handle the entire workload of the organization. That can be expensive. Again, the smaller your organization is, the more expensive that is relative to your budget. But definitely, as you get larger as an organization, that is a relatively inexpensive addition to provide some redundancy. And finally, having a hot spare hard drive. The most common failure. In fact, I was reading some statistics in preparation for this presentation, and the most common hardware failure, and it's 80% of the time of hardware failures, is a hard drive, because it's constantly moving, it's constantly generating heat, it's used all the time. So having an extra spare hard drive available, and there's certain ways in servers or in storage arrays where you can actually just build that into your purchase. You just have one drive, so that if one of the drives fails, the server or the array automatically knows that there's a spare available, and it actually replicates things to that array so it doesn't mitigate and put your business at further risk, and that buys you the time to be able to physically replace or do a warranty replacement on the failed drive that, again, doesn't have any impact on your organization. So those are the additional considerations, and I want to keep moving because we're on to the backup next, and that's very critical. But James, any final thoughts before we move on to that?
Nope. We got to plow right into the backups, which we could spend a lot of time talking about backups, but we did want to drive home a point here about there's a number of different ways to solve the backup problem, and the part that we really want you to consider is it's not how or what that's doing it, it's the time that it takes you to get back online is the most important consideration that you should have. So we went through a couple of kind of anecdotal evidence of, and Nate, in my experience, of things that actually happen in an outage and disaster, because a lot of times you say that and you kind of have this picture of like an earthquake or a comet or some other highly unlikely thing that's going to like be a quote-unquote disaster like in a movie sense, but it's a lot more mundane that tends to happen, where each of these things that we brought up on this slide has actually happened to a customer of ours and that we've had to deal with. One of the more common ones is a pipe burst or a water heater leak. You have the sprinklers come on, you could have a toilet overflow, anything. If you're in a suite with the people above you or the water pipes run above the server closet, an unfortunate mechanical failure that could happen at your house could be exactly the thing that takes out your equipment. We had a soaked server room, then all the equipment had to be replaced. A customer had an ice storm where they took out their power and it wasn't restored for like 5 days at the business. Or we've had incidents where either from malicious actions or incompetent actions or accidental actions, an employee has just kind of deleted the wrong thing or removed the wrong thing or changed something, and you need to be able to recover from that incident. And then there's just the general hardware. These are physical components that tend to wear out. The biggest example most recently is a major hard drive manufacturer made a class of 3 terabyte drives that had 8 or 9 times the failure rate that is normally acceptable. And we've had a couple instances where you literally can't, when one of them fails in an array, usually a server can lose one drive and you replace it before the other ones fail and you can keep going. We literally couldn't replace it when one failed before the next one failed because the whole group of them were basically a bad batch. So that can really, really cause some problems for you over time. So we want to go ahead, Nate. I'll let you take this slide. We just want to get into some of the more important bits of this recovery.
Yeah, and I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So the questions that we ask our customers to think about is how fast and what is the impact on that last slide? What is the impact to your business in the event of any one of those outages, and what impact / cost? And so how fast, then think about how fast you need to recover and what is your tolerance for any particular outage. And so we've listed some common variables here. Do you need it instantaneously? Do you need it within 4 hours or within 72 hours? These are the key variables that we see oftentimes in the industry as far as solutions meeting those requirements. And the next section is about, well, what are the business functions that need to be restored in what time frames? Because not all functions are equal. So for instance, one of our customers, they identified that they're a larger customer. They had 20 servers, 20 different functions. They identified that 5 of the 20 servers were absolutely critical, and they needed to be recovered within 4 hours. And they identified that the other servers, if they got them up and running in 3 business days or 72 hours, that was perfectly fine. Now, the larger your organization is and the more servers you have that are divided across different roles, the functions across different roles, the more you're able to parse the recovery times for the different services. The smaller your organization is, oftentimes all those functions exist on the same single server, so it might be you're not able to necessarily parse that out. But thinking about the impacts of these different components and the cost to your business if there's an outage, and what are the things you can do, the redundancy that we talked about earlier, having a spare machine that we talked about earlier, a hosted environment where you can get redundant internet connections or redundant firewalls. What are the things you can do to make sure that you can recover from these events in common outages? So James, I'll let you take the last slide where we talk about kind of the critical components of the backup.
Yeah, I mean, this is the other piece to consider is a lot of times people assume the backup is the thing sitting next to the server or some software piece that's just running. And really there's a lot of components that all really need to be functioning at a level that allows the backup solution to function. And we've had this case where one of these pieces will fail, and it just makes the entire backup non-functional. Each individual component is more or less okay, but they don't marry up right. They aren't compatible with each other. The whole solution isn't delivering the service that you need. So in this particular case, we're talking about even from the server OS, again, having a modern OS, if it gets too out of date, modern backup softwares can't interface with it. Then you have to have the right backup software to deliver the thing that you want it to do, whether you're taking an image or a file level, or however it's handling things like open files. And then you have to be able to get, once that backup software is talking correctly to the operating system, getting the data, you have to be able to move that data through your local network to the local backup device where it will stay in case of being used. And we've had situations where, you know, older switches or bad cables or any number of things don't allow that transfer to happen in a timely fashion, and then your backup, even though it's technically working on the server, it's not getting to where it will be useful to you. And then again, we always want to include a disaster recovery piece because, again, in the business burning down or power outages or whatever, you want to also move that data to a secure off-site facility, which of course then means you need to move it out of your building and into that secure facility. You need to be able to have an internet connection that can handle that kind of data transfer, as well as being sure that you're considering how you're going to pay for that storage of that server data in the offsite space. So all of those things have to be playing together nicely and working at a high level for your entire solution to be functional. And if one of them starts going sideways, the whole thing kind of breaks, and your recovery times increase by a lot, or the point of time in which you can go back to is delayed farther than might be acceptable to you. So these are all components you want to make sure are all functioning together to give you that that particular solution that give it to the parameters that you need.
Yeah, James, and I think the most common place in this whole chain of events, the most common place that we've seen where you're not able to validate or know if there's a problem is in the local backup device. Many people have tried to use external hard drives or just USB attached hard drives or storage devices that you can't actually monitor or alert on. You have no idea if the drive failed. You have no idea if there's a problem, if there's a communication failure. So being able to actually monitor any problems or outages or issues in every single aspect of this chain is the only way you can ensure a successful backup, so that even though I hope you never have to use it, in the event of you having to recover from an outage, I don't want you to have to think, gosh, I hope my backup's okay. So making sure that you have these pieces in place can pretty much ensure that you will always have a backup in the event you need it. So so that's basically what we covered today. Again, there's so many more details we could have gone into, but hopefully this provided a foundation of there's some basic rules that if we can follow from a hardware management, hardware lifecycle management, some basic redundancy components, having a good backup, making sure that you don't overlook the power requirements of your organization. If you can do those things, it will contribute to your network running better, being more stable, more reliable for your staff, which will hopefully keep them happier. That's the idea, as well as enable for a quick and efficient support in the event of problems. So thank you very much for your time. And by all means, if have any questions, please follow up with James or myself afterwards, and we'll be happy to provide you this information. And it'll be recorded and available on our website within the next 24 hours. James, any final thoughts?
No, I think we've covered a lot here, so there's a lot to unpack, but it's important subjects.
All right, well, thank you everyone for participating today, and have a fantastic day.